So thanks again for joining us. Welcome PMI-SAC in our continuing Lunch and Learn sessions. Today, we are very, very pleased to have Adam Cherrill join us and his lively and very interactive discussion on mastering the hard skills of project management. Before I talk a little bit more about Adam, I'm going to pass it over to our president, Candida, to say a few words.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. I hope you're all keeping warm and dry. I guess it could be worse. I just did a huge workshop this morning for our friends out east in Ottawa, and I guess they had a huge thunderstorm all night long. Fortunately, all the technology worked, but I think this is kind of a prelude to what we're going to hear today. I'm really excited about today's session. Adam, thank you so much for, giving us this opportunity to just really hear lots of, what's going on out there. I think that we all know now that as project managers, we have to be really putting on so many hats and we just don't know what's around the corner. Right. So, what we've estimated projects to be or our project to be, sometimes it just takes us off to another track and how do we bring that back? And, I'm excited to hear about estimating and risk planning and earned value. I always say, before 2013, us project managers, we never used to put the flood on our risk register, or it used to be, oh, watch out for that. Right. And then all of a sudden, guess what we do in June? We're watching out for floods. And, now we've had to deal with COVID and pivot, and, you're using all these words. So I don't want to take up the time that you're really here to hear Adam. So thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Candida. I appreciate that. I'll just do a little blurb about Adam here now. So, of course, he is the president for Cherrill Consulting Group, where he delivers competitive intelligence and advisory solutions to maximize revenue growth. He's very good at transforming operational capability and sustained competitive advantage. He has a deep background in aerospace and defense industry, and which crosses over 25 different years on a multitude of different platforms, both domestically and internationally. So we're very, very fortunate to have him. Just a reminder to keep yourself on mute during the presentation. We will be having some time at the end for questions. So just make sure to drop them in the chat box, and we'll get to them towards the end. So Adam, without further ado, I will pass it over to you.
Thanks so much. Okay, you all see the screen? Should be working okay? Okay, super. So, typically there's a lot of material here, and I'm so grateful to Southern Alberta chapter because you're like a pilot test case for this. I briefed this to the professional development days at PMI Minnesota last year, and it's been building out, and it continues to build. And each of the disciplines I'm going to talk about in this briefing is ripe for its own, 1 or 2 hour sessions at least. But I wanted to kind of integrate this together in a framework and present it to you and open it up for feedback when we're done and questions. Does this resonate? Is this was this value added? I think you'll get something out of it. And again, thank you for the opportunity to brief you on it today. So I'm going to talk about the hard skills of project management. And there's a lot of talk about soft skills and emotional intelligence and other aspects of soft power in what it's necessary for project managers to be successful in delivering results. But often, hopefully not at the short shrift of discussing the hard skills. Got to have both. And this is a focus on the hard skills. This is a focus on core disciplines of project management excellence to deliver on commitments, which is really why we take on this responsibility, is to go deliver strategic commitments that have been delegated down to us as PMs to go create new value capability for the organization or enterprise or company or whatever. So I'll talk a little bit about what I'm hoping to convey in terms of the objectives. Thank you, Kevin, for the brief background. I've got a chart with a bunch of logos and credentials. We'll blow through that. got a nice little chart. I talk about the soft and the hard skills and the necessary. You got to have both. You got to work on both as part of any kind of professional development. A little bit of context and perspective from the aerospace and defense industry specifically, who I've grown up in this environment and was educated and trained in this world of very rigorous and disciplined project management that is probably at one end of the extreme spectrum of rigorous project management processes that are applied throughout multiple industry verticals. I think construction and large scale infrastructure projects probably use a similar level of discipline. But then to talk about, what does it mean to start with the end in mind, and what are these disciplines that we're talking about? And then a way to kind of think about a growth roadmap in terms of capability maturity on how you can achieve this sort of level of project management excellence throughout your self-development and professional career. So cover a lot of information here. I'm going to blow through it. And again, each of these subtopics is probably warrants its own separate discussion, but I'm trying to synthesize this into a 1 hour framework to be able to deliver at least the executive summary. So what are we trying to do? Again, differentiating the hard and soft project management skills, and really talk about, at the end of the day, what we're being asked to provide in managing a complex project at any stage along the way is to be able to forecast the estimate at completion, to say, where are we today? And based on today's date, where are we going to be when this project is done? Both from a cost and even a schedule perspective, right? So these are estimates of completion, and they can be derived from a number of ways. But being able to objectively measure performance and use those objective metrics to help drive estimates of completion are really critical and have huge consequences for any malfeasance or mismanagement in the defense industry in particular when working for the government. And so as a result of a lot of integration of material, I've been able to sort of distill this down into what I call these 5 competency areas. The first is probably the worst title I have yet, but I call it project architecting. And we're going to talk about, just making sure we're aligning scope and responsibilities and being able to break a project down into its constituent components to make it easier to delegate out and track throughout the rest of the process. Next, we're going to talk about integrated master planning, or the IMP, which then drives into the concept of master scheduling. I'm going to talk a bit about risk, issue, and opportunity management, planning for and dealing with uncertainty, right? All things, plans are great, but planning is everything. And then ultimately, sort of a primer, an introduction on earned value management, on how all this gets pulled together. And then what does a competency roadmap look like in order to take each step along the way? Because I've found, sort of as an anecdote, and I'll describe it, there are no shortcuts to getting to the end state here. I had a client who actually was a former executive who recruited me from, in this case, from Arizona to come to Minnesota. He sends me a LinkedIn one day. He's like, I'm desperate for help. I can't forecast my projects. I don't know how to plan my revenue. My PMs we don't have the rigor and the discipline in the enterprise to deliver this kind of information. I want to see earned value metrics. I want to see independent estimates of completion. I want to see all these metrics. But when I went in from a situational assessment perspective at the beginning to figure out what their current state is and their competencies are, they really didn't even have a good sense of building a work breakdown structure for their projects in flight. And unless you nail down these fundamentals, you can't possibly get to anything useful out of doing earned value or integrated master scheduling. You just end up with a jumbled mess of disconnected components that really aren't helping you. So that's a really important takeaway that we'll talk about, just this need to go through the incremental steps along the way. All right, so again, a little bit about me. Big achievement this year was achieving or earning my Certified Management Consultant, or CMC, designation. I hold the portfolio management professional credential through PMI. There aren't too many of us out there in the community, so it's always nice to be able to share perspectives from the portfolio view of having run and managed projects and having run and managed programs to having run and managed portfolios, and bringing this sort of big picture perspective to these presentations. I sit on the board of the IMC USA, and before that was very active in the Minnesota chapter of PMI. Served, Kevin, in your role as the programs chair, and served 1 year as the director of finance in that capacity. But background, as you said, aerospace and defense, and a variety of degrees, many from the University of Arizona, and some executive education. So never really stopped learning. It's sort of just a real important component of who I am. All right, so I like this chart. I like to talk about this chart and the importance that PMs have to bring to the table both sets of skills. So if you look along the x-axis, we're talking about delivering results and what results we achieve, whether we're meeting expectations, exceeding, or not meeting expectations. Or on the y-axis, how we're achieving those results, whether we're ineffective with our personnel skills, whether we're okay, or whether we're really effective in our leadership. And, kind of working our way from in to out. If we're ineffective leaders and we're not meeting results, we might want to consider a career change, because that's not going to be really helpful for executing projects where people put responsibility and trust in us to deliver on our commitments and manage people along the way. If you're focused a little too much on the soft skills, on the how we're achieving results but not delivering, you can end up in the, quote, office of no results danger zone. And the corollary of that, which I know a lot of colleagues, and even some of my background, just being really hard driving, we're going to deliver results, we've got deadlines, come hell or high water, we're going to get there. We might be achieving results, but at the expense of collateral damage along the way. And that's not good for anyone either. That can only go on once or twice before people take notice, and you can have real impacts in your career. So this concept of high performance project management is a blend of both of these. There's a lot of work being discussed today on soft skills of, how effective are you at building your team and aligning your team and using situational leadership and conflict management skills. But at the same time, we really need to blend that with these hard skill capabilities of how we're planning our projects, how we're architecting them from the start, how we're planning for uncertainty, and how we're measuring and delivering objective results along the way. So just a bit of context and perspective. A colleague of mine from Tucson, who's now a senior attorney within Raytheon, there were some senior firings a few years back of executives for malfeasance associated with reporting estimates of completion. I mean, these are enormous companies working on massive contracts. You see here the DoD, the Department of Defense, requires earned value on any kind of cost or incentive type contract. So if they're underwriting the risk and they're paying the cost to develop a new weapon system, they're going to allow the contractor to earn a certain percentage of profit margin, 6%, 8%, 10% on that development contract. The government wants to know that its money is being spent in accordance with its plans. And, with all due respect to the agile, practitioners, the last thing the DoD is going to say is, here's $20 million and let us know in 6 months where you are and whether you hit your requirements or deliverables. It doesn't work that way. So they're spending taxpayer money. They need to know that the money is being spent and value is being delivered in accordance with baseline plans. And so the firm's valuations, these companies, Raytheon, Lockheed, Northrop, large, massive American companies, they're communicating to their shareholders quarterly on their earnings, and their earnings are derived from their execution on projects. And so estimates of completion on major projects have a huge impact on their valuation, and correspondingly, any mismanagement, poor management, negligence, malfeasance can have severe consequences. We're drilled into this at a very early age in learning about managing projects and finance in this world. So regardless of where you stand, and how you manage your projects, whether you're using agile or, disciplined PM, waterfall techniques, it's not relevant when you think about what are the fundamental principles of project success that you need to answer, that any PM team needs to answer. And the first is, what does done look like? When I'm done with this project, what does that mean? What are my deliverables? What are my completions? Am I delivering hardware, software, documents, a new process, a new capability? What does done look like? Answering that question is about 50% of executing a successful project. Everything flows from this. Next is thinking about, what is the path? How are we going to assess maturity along the way of the project to assess whether we're making progress towards getting done? Number three, do we have the resources to go execute this as planned? Do we have people? Do we have the time? Do we have the money? Do we have interdependencies to reach done as planned? This is all about scheduling and resourcing and resource allocation. Number four, this is a nice way of saying stuff's going to happen, right? What impediments are we going to encounter along the way? What opportunities are going to arise? What risks we're going to have to deal with? What issues are we going to have to take immediate corrective action for in recovery on the way to getting to done? And then ultimately, how do we know that we're making progress? It's not about the passage of time or the expenditure of money to track a percent complete, but physically, how do we know that we're making progress, and how can we convey those measurements that we have confidence that we're moving along the right way? And so we have to answer these fundamental questions. And then when we take these questions on the left and align them to these disciplines on the right, this is the genesis and this is the basis of the briefing, right? So how do we know, what does done look like is a skill and a competency of architecting projects right from the start, building the integrated master plan, formulating a master schedule, being able to understand cost and schedule risk. I'm not going to get into issue management or even opportunity management. It's just a lot to cover in that domain. And then ultimately, a very top level primer on earned value management, on how 3 independent sets of data can help us do better forecasting for our estimates to complete. And then what does this look like in terms of a roadmap, in terms of a maturity model? There's in the systems engineering world and the process engineering world, there's something called a capability maturity model, and generally ranges from 1 to 5, meaning kind of 1 is you're kind of doing things ad hoc, to at level 5, you're continuously optimizing your processes and the way you work. So I took this and set this up as an analogy to say, kind of give you a gauge and on an analog dial of where you are in terms of how you understand these principles and how they're being applied on your projects and your organization, whether you're at the first level 1 and you're just getting started in aligning scope and responsibilities, or are you level 4 where you're quantitatively measuring and providing feedback control with your metrics, and ultimately you bring in your risk and opportunity assessment in, and you're adjusting your estimates to complete to account for risk. Very few organizations operate at that level, and those that do use their project management expertise as a competitive advantage. It really does become a differentiator for their companies in terms of executing at that high level of performance. All right, so we're still working on the title of this one, Project Architecting. You could see that applies to a lot of the elements that we're talking about, but at the root, this is about aligning scope and responsibilities. So very important to convey the basis of any good project planning is all about the work breakdown structure. Okay, how do we construct a WBS from a statement of work or a need statement or capability statement? Because ultimately what the work breakdown structure is doing is it's decomposing the project into a hierarchy, into a series of component parts. You can think of a motorcycle being decomposed into the frame and to the engine and the wheel assemblies, or whatever example there. You can use many different examples, but ultimately how we code the WBS, and then allocate elements of the WBS to the different teams who are going to be contributing to it. This is ultimately the basis of what done looks like. Are we delivering 10 motorcycles and a data package and some training and some test reports, whatever it is that you're committing to at the project initiation, or what's defined by the statement of work, has to be converted into a WBS for tracking. And the WBS, and many people number them and code them differently. There's no right or wrong answer. However you do it, as long as there's a coding system, because it then serves as the reference for any kind of earned value, the integrated master plan and the IMS all get referenced back to the work breakdown structure. And when we take the work breakdown structure and we cross-reference it to the organization breakdown structure, or OBS, meaning think of a functionally matrixed organization where you have engineering and operations and supply chain and project management and all different kinds of organizations and stakeholders who are going to be working on a complex project. When we set the WBS and the OBS in a matrix format, where those intersect defines what we call the control accounts. And the responsibility assignment matrix starts to aggregate all this information and define where these control accounts are, where scope, schedule, and cost are planned and managed, right? So if operations is responsible for a couple of elements in the WBS, they're delegated that responsibility and they own the associated control accounts with those WBS elements, and similar and down through the different functional organizations. I've seen responsibility assignment matrices as simple as this. I've seen them go as detailed as literally ultimately breaking down the cost and delegating the amount of cost allocation. Ultimately where you need to go is delegating the amount of cost that each organization has, cost, schedule, and performance requirements in order to deliver on that chunk of work that's allocated to their area of responsibility as part of the whole project. I think the PMBOK talks about this a little bit, and ultimately I'll build up some case studies that show how you go from WBS, an organization breakdown structure, to the responsibility assignment matrix, which is really, this is fundamental to understanding what does done look like for a project. Okay, moving on. Integrated planning. How do we define the path and the measures for execution success in terms of, as we mature over time, as we proceed through time, how are we measuring whether we're on the path to being done and assessing maturity along the way? And so a colleague of mine, Glenn Alleman, writes a lot about this. So the point is the IMP describes where the program is going, if there are interdependent paths required taken to reach the destination, and how we're ultimately going to measure and assess the points along the way. So I find it's very effective, and you'll see an example when we're building an integrated master plan. I like to express the events and the accomplishments in the past tense, meaning because at the end of the day, it's either completed or it's not completed. We're not going to take percent complete on, okay, the critical design review is completed. It's either done or it's not done. And if it's done, that's great. We move on to the next aspect. If it's not done, we figure out why not. But we're not saying, well, it's 80% done, so give me the credit for it. No, it's either it's done or it's not done. And it's really important to structure this in a way that we're measuring the maturity of the product or the service, whatever we're delivering in terms of the project, against this plan, because at the end of the day, it's the only way we're measuring progress. It's not, we're measuring, well, time has gone by, so we're 50% complete because we're halfway through the year, or we've consumed half of our budget, so we're 50% complete. No, it doesn't work that way. We need to use those parameters in conjunction with really understanding the maturity as we progress along the project here. Question, program here. Do you mean the schedule? Not yet. I mean a plan. We're going to get to the schedule after we talk about the plan. If we have a good plan, then the schedule is going to flow from a good integrated master plan. And so we're going to set this up in a taxonomy and a hierarchy where we talk about events and accomplishments. In the DoD way of doing things, they even take it another level and they go down to criteria. I tried to simplify it for a client of mine to say, let's really focus on major events and the accomplishments that substantiate those events, because by then we can delegate out the accomplishments into work packages, which we'll talk about, and ultimately tasks that become networked in a complex schedule. So the difference between the plan and the schedule you see here on the left edge is the plan is a top level view of these, but then the master schedule brings you to the task level and starts to intertwine and define all the interdependencies between the tasks and the schedule. Okay. And so here's sort of a way of thinking about what a plan might look like from a very cartoonish way. We have a start and we've got to complete major events along the way. Event A, B, C, and we see there are two predecessors to completing event C, which drives sequentially through the project through completion. And I think here is an excerpt of an integrated master plan I pulled from a project I executed some time ago. In this case, the event C was an integrated baseline review, or IBR, which at that point we're literally baselining the program plan with the customer, and we're saying this is our common reference, what we're going to execute against. So here are all the green I have as an event, the blue as an accomplishment, and then all the different work packages that have to get done in order to substantiate that the program plans and directives have been established. So what you see here is a coding structure where everything is traceable to the statement of work, to the code in the work breakdown structure, and even what element of the organization is responsible, from the project management office, supply chain management, systems engineering, test and evaluation, operations. So each of these functional organizations had to deliver a particular plan or a directive. We collected it, we tracked these, and only when all of these accomplishments, these work packages were completed, could we take completion for the program plans and directives having been established. And this becomes a pretty complex Excel spreadsheet, but it's what ultimately we're held contractually to when we measure ourselves against. So once we have a good plan, now we can start taking it down to the next level and building up a schedule. And before we talk about what it means to build up a schedule, the whole point of this exercise is we have to develop a performance measurement baseline. It's a great quote at the bottom. It's really like we have to set up the rules so we know if we're winning or losing. We have to have a clear target or goal to achieve so that we can compare it with the actuals and see where we are and how much more do we to go. We had a CEO would ask us, I want to understand your baseline. I want to know every day, are we winning or losing against your baseline plan? And it's really a good way to think about it, because if we're behind, it means it shows where do we have to identify what we need to take corrective action on. If we're ahead, it's great. Let's bank the reserve and keep moving at high speed. But the performance measurement baseline is a very critical part, and it's a foundation of earned value management. And at the end of the day, as we build out our schedules, we start to see the recurring theme of the, quote, the S curve, where generally we're starting off on a project and we have a ramp up, we're getting people on board, right? We're going through the initiating and planning stages of the project. Then we start to hit stride where we're expending resources. This is a cumulative curve, by the way. And then towards the end, we start to hit some diminishing returns. We start to ramp off people and ramp down our expenditure. And so we typically see this sort of S curve throughout our projects that we manage. It might not necessarily be as smooth, but they generally look like S curves. And so at each point along to the time, we'll demonstrate, how much, where should we be, what did we plan for, and then we'll take measurements against this reference in terms of our cost expenditure and our accrual of earned value, or the physical percent complete of work that we're taking credit for that should be done by that point in time. So very important to establish a time phase baseline. Even if we're not using earned value, even if you're just measuring cost expenditure, very critical to say, here's my layout, my performance measurement baseline, and how am I measuring cost against it? And so kind of taking this one step further in terms of how all these different work packages and planning packages and even summary level, I didn't go over this a lot, but again, you see the concept of the S-curve. And as PMs, what we'll do is we'll lay in our management baseline or our plan. We might hold some undistributed budget that we have control over, right, for tasks that haven't yet been allocated. And we'll set our budget at completion at the summation of our baseline plus any undistributed funds. Depending on the governance within the project execution authority, the PM might hold the management reserve, or maybe the director who sits above the program manager might hold the management reserve. But typically the MR is held outside of the budget at completion and converted into performance measurement as we spend money to mitigate risks or deal with issues. When you add all this up is the total allocated budget. And so kind of looking at it from the reverse, if we're executing, in this case, a fixed price contract, we'll have a price of the contract. There'll be some profit, hopefully. The difference between the two is essentially the cost of executing the project or the total allocated budget. And this is sort of a cascade of how these components rack and stack up into your cost baseline, and understanding what we're measuring in terms of the baseline versus how we hold the management reserve and escrow for risks to mitigate and issue and opportunities to capitalize on. So what we're doing with the integrated master schedule is we're collecting the scope, resource, time estimates, and interdependencies into a single baseline reference. Okay, so our objective is to get to this S-curve. Okay, but we do that through this process that we're walking through today in terms of establishing the baseline, in terms of what's the work breakdown structure, what is the integrated master plan, who is going to be responsible for executing the blocks of work in the hierarchy of the entire project, to include subcontractors and other entities that we rely on and depend on in executing a project. We then start to lay in our schedules of time and of how much time we think each work package is going to take. And then ultimately we need to allocate resources to that in terms of labor hours, time, dollars for material acquisition. And so we go through this complex process of ultimately getting to the point where we can extract from the scheduling program, Microsoft Project, Primavera, we can pull out the summation of costs over time and build up this cumulative performance measurement baseline. That's what we're trying to do through this entire process. And so the IMS is critical because what it's doing is it's traceable to your plan, right, where we have events and accomplishments and maybe even some interim milestones. And the integrated master schedule is synchronizing and aligning these different work packages over time and illustrating interdependencies, so we know as we're progressing through time what's getting done, and if we're slipping, how it might impact the schedule network downstream, or if we're working ahead, how it might buy us some schedule margin in the end. So ultimately, we're scheduling the work so we can build up that performance measurement baseline, which serves as our reference for program project control. Okay, moving on here. Risk, issue, and opportunity management, right? Anticipating and planning for uncertainty. This is where I think I interject some humor. I saw this great quote. Risk management is how adults manage projects. And I think it's really true, because once you lay in your baseline. Once you have a good plan, we know things don't go according to plan. So it's our ability to manage risk, issues, and opportunities within context of the plan really separates and differentiates the expert PMs from those who are just, well, I have a plan. Now let's see if you can keep on track with the plan. Quantitative risk management was formulated at least 300 years ago from a French mathematician who basically outlined these parameters of saying, well, if we multiply the probability of occurrence with the severity of consequence, we can get a kind of a risk factor, which is widely used in the industry, to understand basically an expected value of the loss. And of course, the cartoon on the right, we all know that if something goes wrong mid-flight, the severity of consequence is pretty high, but Ted apparently is improving or increasing the probability of occurrence by fumbling for the wrong button next to his seat there. So I thought that was a classic cartoon to discuss risk management. So I often use 2D risk, but I'll show you a couple of approaches to understanding risk and accounting for it. So what's most important is the definitions and the relationships. That at its root, we think about risks, issues, and opportunities in terms of technical events, programmatic events, and even business events. And I think what we differentiate, I saw a really good explanation that, technical events are just technical problems or technical challenges that we face on more from a performance standpoint in terms of what we're delivering. Programmatic events are generally within control of the program team, where business events are external to the program team, right? So a supplier has a fire at the factory and they're going to be late on deliveries, right? Okay, that's an issue. That's a business event. It has gone wrong, so we might trace something like that through the issue channel and figure out how we're going to take corrective action to get back on track when something has gone wrong. It's sort of like the difference between risk management and issue management is, in risk management, the bomb hasn't yet gone off, and issue management, the bomb has gone off, and we're cleaning up after the fact to figure out what we need to do to solve the problem. And then opportunity management, it's interesting. The PMBOK uses risk management as this general category and talks about threats and opportunities, threats being negative and opportunities being positive. I appreciate that, but I think there's just something in the English language that when you hear risk, it always connotates negative, like a problem. So I typically like to differentiate between risk and opportunity as a better nomenclature. But at the end of the day, your impacts, your consequences are in one of three categories. It's going to hit you on the cost, it's going to hit you on the schedule, or it's going to hit you on the performance, and or all three concurrently, right? It's unusual that a risk is just going to have a schedule impact and not an associated cost impact. Or if something goes wrong technically, it's probably going to hit you in all three categories. So, using this as an integrated framework, this actually comes out of the DoD, the Department of Defense, risk and opportunity management guidelines. So I really like this diagram. And so one of the things that we have to do, number one, is set up a cost risk database or risk register. And here is one that I've used, a framework that I've used on multiple projects where we're tracking both opportunities and threats. And what we want to do is think about this from what's the severity of consequence, meaning what's the gross impact if the opportunity is realized or the risk comes to fruition, as the risk is not mitigated. How do we factor this with some probability? And then how do we figure out the net expected value based on where the probability is? So I think the simple math works as follows. I think I use like 0.9 for very high and 0.1 for very low. So you can see, for example, this second line. Here's an opportunity. If we could take our subject matter expert support from 2 full-time equivalent to 1 full-time equivalent, we can save, in this case, probably $2 million, but it's a very low probability. So I'm going to factor it down 10% to 10%. So my current net of that opportunity is only $200,000, right? Or whatever the scale is in this case. And I do the same thing on my risk side. But at the end, in the balance sheet, basically I net out what my net opportunities and risks are. And you can see I've got more gross risk and net risk than I have opportunity. I have, in this case, $5 million more of risk. So it's a viable strategy at the beginning of a project, for example, to set your MR or your management reserve equal to your total of your gross risk, and manage that in escrow and hold that in escrow. That is, your team is working through and tracking these and trying to mitigate risk and realize opportunities. Then you're making a business case analysis on each one of these, where if someone comes and says, well, hey boss, if I spend a little bit of money, if I spend $100K, I can realize $2 million of savings on reducing my 2.0 full-time equivalent to 1. That's a pretty good business case to make. And it's the PM's discretion to say that's a good idea. I'm going to spend some management reserve to take advantage of this opportunity, and then take it off my risk and opportunity register. So a very powerful way of managing risk. There are various tools in the marketplace. I mean, obviously this is from a basic Excel program, but very important to track risks this way. Okay. So let's see. In addition to managing your cost risk, it's also really important to manage your schedule risk. And I admit I'm going to gloss over this, but there's a body of work and analysis in our field today on the topic of schedule risk analysis. It's becoming much more important for my clients in the aerospace and defense. They want to see, okay, you've laid out this beautiful Microsoft project schedule with interdependencies and resources, and you have predicted start and end points. But here's a case where I've laid out a schedule network, and this was from last year, and it said basically the probability of me hitting the deterministic value is 4% to hit my schedule as I planned it, because I accommodated and I accounted for some uncertainty on a task by task level. Well, that's not really going to fly. So I don't want to baseline a schedule that gives me a 4% chance of actually meeting it. So what I'd like to do is to simulate the schedule with some uncertainty in the different task network, which is a whole subject of another discussion, but incorporate that uncertainty so that, maybe I baseline my schedule at 90%. And in this case, it's a 3-week difference between delivering at the end of September versus delivering the 3rd week of October. What I would do in this case is talk to my customer and say, well, I really want to baseline my schedule that gives me a higher probability of meeting it, but internally we're going to really drive aggressively and manage aggressively to this deterministic value, but know that based on the theory of constraints and how delays and tasks obviously propagate through your entire schedule network, that things are going to happen. And so let's account for some of that uncertainty with a schedule buffer, and hold that buffer and track how we're consuming that schedule buffer at an overall project level. Very important body of knowledge. The reference here that I don't have cited, but the concept of critical chain project management, if you've heard of this, is all about managing buffers and uncertainty, because once you start networking tasks together, you will no longer have a deterministic outcome. You'll have a very low probability of achieving the outcome based on the tasks without any accommodation for uncertainty. Okay, so managing cost risk, managing schedule risk, fundamental. I don't have a chart on issue management, but that's all about, when a problem occurs, when the bomb does go off, it's, being able to fundamentally see the problem, swarm it, attack it, escalate it, and solve it, and share those results with other people so we can get back on our program plan. All right, ultimately, where is all this driving to? It's ultimately getting to earned value. And here's a way to visualize what earned value looks like. There's a lot of information on this chart. The purple line, I have to get my color nomenclature right, but the purple line here is that performance measurement baseline. Here's what we plan to do and my budget at completion. But I'm also indicating that we're holding some management reserve from a cost perspective and some schedule buffer from a time perspective. And so here's actually a poor example of measuring today, my costs exceed my planned value, so I have a cost variance, and I'm actually delivering less earned value than what I had planned, so I have an adverse schedule variance. But by plotting this all on one chart will give us a sense of ultimately being able to use some equations to predict what my estimate at completion is based on where I am today. If I have a baseline reference in purple, I'm measuring independently how much money I'm expending on the project, my actual costs, and then my earned value, which we'll talk about in just a second, meaning for the amount of work I plan to achieve by this date, how much have I actually gotten done? And by colliding these three independent parameters gives us a wealth of information to understand variance and how those variants, if I continue to execute at that level of performance, how that's likely going to impact my future state, my future estimates of completion in terms of when I schedule, when I'm going to complete the project, and the cost when I'm complete as well. So it's an important project management technique for measuring performance in an objective manner. And so these three independent measurements are used in conjunction with each other on regular intervals, typically monthly. These are typically large-scale programs or projects will use earned value. Any more frequent than that, maybe at most biweekly. It becomes too much of an administrative and clerical exercise to be collecting all of this information. But what we're trying to do is compare our actual costs for the work that we've collected. So our project team is reporting their costs through their time card system, or however we're collecting costs through supplier expenditures and labor expenditures. So we have a good sense of our actual costs. We're comparing that to the planned value or the baseline, and then we're tracking the physical percent complete and estimating the earned value for the given amount of time. How much work should we have done for the work that is planned in our schedule? And by using all of these metrics, we're able to, these three independent measurements, we're able to derive a number of subordinate metrics. I don't have them listed here. They're in the PMBOK to estimate variance and estimates of completion from all of these different indices: schedule performance index, the cost performance index. I think many people forget it after they pass their PMP exam, but it can come back to haunt if you're not paying it, if you don't know what they are and you're tasked with running an earned value project. And so again, at the end of the day, what are we trying to do? We're trying to understand our estimate at completion based on a particular time in the project. So we're looking at our planned value, our baseline. We're looking at our earned value or physical percent complete based metric of progress to plan, and we're comparing our actual costs to estimate, not only with the work that we've done and the expenditure of costs that we've accrued, but to figure out how much is it really going to take to finish our estimate to complete, so that when we add those together, we have a robust estimate at completion. Okay. So how do we pull all this together? I know we say drink from a fire hose. It's a lot of information, a lot to know in order to get to this level. But hence is the sort of the stair step approach that I alluded to at the beginning of the presentation. And in order to get to the sort of level 5 of excellence, being able to do risk-adjusted estimates of complete and applying principles of, in this case, critical chain project management, we have to start at the beginning, and we have to build competency one step at a time. We have to make sure our projects are aligned, that we know what done looks like in terms of the work breakdown structure, who's going to be performing the work in terms of the organization breakdown structure, and how do we assign responsibility from those two key inputs. From that, we build up an integrated master plan. There's element of estimating that should be done probably at this early stage of the master planning, in addition to even identifying for technical projects, what are the measures of effectiveness. Instead of saying, a review is completed, we might want to assess the maturity of some technology. We have to define what those measures of effectiveness are so we know, again, whether we're winning or losing as we're measuring performance to the plan. Level 3 is all about coming up with the performance measurement baseline, that reference by which we're going to assess whether we're winning or losing, and our ability to configuration control that baseline as we make changes, as we bring in management reserve and convert that into work packages. We have to have an ability to configuration control our baseline so it's accurate at all times. The next step is using the information from our execution to measure these earned value metrics, to perform cost and schedule risk management, to always be cognizant of the critical path on the schedule, and focus all attention on executing to the critical path. And level 5, again, a differentiating capability. How do we blend the risk and the EAC so we have a true perspective on where we're expecting to end up? And how are we applying some of these principles, best-in-class principles of understanding the theory of constraints and understanding how critical chain, which I don't really cover in this briefing yet, drive project management excellence. So I really appreciate the opportunity to brief this to you today. Really appreciate your listening, and sort of one takeaway before we go into Q&A, and I'm happy to stay over time a little bit. I know there's a lot of content here, and this work integrates a lot of sources and areas of expertise. It's been building for a long time. And what I really want to look for is some feedback to assess, would there be demand to convert some of this into a professional development course using a case study that kind of walks through how to do this? One initial idea was to do this on like a 6-week basis, like 90 minutes per week. I think one full day immersion would be a little rough, maybe 2 full day or 2 half day sessions, but definitely welcome your feedback on this. And what I'd like to do is I'm going to open it up, Kevin, if you want to, unmute, take questions. I'll stop the share. I'm going to put a link in the chat box to a feedback form that I put together that just will ask if you have some feedback for me, and is there something, if you'd like to receive a hard copy briefing of this or a soft copy of the presentation, it'll just be automatically sent to your email here. So I'm going to put that link in the chat and open it up for questions.
Adam, thanks so much. That was awesome. There's, like you said, there was a lot of information to get through and cover on that, so you did a great job. So it's much appreciated. I know Grant just kind of mentioned he felt that this would be very valuable inside a course as well. So again, if you don't mind, kind of, put your thoughts in there. I know Adam and I spoke about this, and we both agree that there is going to be value. So let's, you guys are all PMs here, so let's get specific and everything. So if you would like to unmute yourself, please go ahead. And I know we have a lot of smart people here, and I'm sure there's going to be a couple of questions in the last 6 minutes or so before we come up to the 1 o'clock time. So feel free to go ahead and unmute yourself, and let's poke Adam some more here and see what else he's got for us.
Hi, Adam. Thank you for the presentation. I have a question from my side. In your presentation, you mentioned that the management reserves are held by the project manager. Is it always the case that the management reserves are held by the project manager or by the management? That's my question. And second, I would like to ask you, where can I find good templates for doing earned value management? Okay, so 2 questions. So risk management, it really depends on the governance of the organization on whether management reserve is held by the PM or it's held at a level above the PM. I've seen it work a couple different ways, and that's why I even I showed on one of the charts the difference between undistributed budget and management reserve. So what I find as a best practice is that the PM has to have some discretionary ability to deal with unplanned activity. Okay, we can't plan perfectly, and so I find that a good balance is that the PM gets to hold some undistributed budget that hasn't been planned in the performance measurement baseline, but there's some risk and review board. Maybe it's held by the director,
because at the end of the day, the whole point of management reserve is to convert it to mitigate risk or realize opportunity. And so a best practice is that the risk review board, for example, will meet monthly and make decisions. I mean, they'll be looking at, okay, do we have new risks to add to the register? What are we doing to mitigate the risks that are currently being, applied funding and resources to go mitigate? And do we need to release management reserve to address new risks or opportunities? So that becomes like a business case discussion at the risk review board. So depending on the governance, if maybe the PM has that authority, provided it's documented as part of a risk and review process, or maybe it's held by the director. But in any case, there should be a formal process to convert and to release MR based on the business case. If it's going to save me $1 million in risk by spending $50K of management reserve, for example, that's a good trade to make. And then what we do is we convert that management reserve into a work package that becomes part of our performance measurement baseline. You mentioned templates on tracking EV. If you want to send me a note separately, I've got a really nice template that I use for building that S-curve, the performance measurement baseline S-curve, which you can't get out of Microsoft Project. It won't give you that nice curve, but it'll give you, up until the time you're calculating EV, it'll give you everything up to that time, which is good too. But I find that doing some of that work in Excel is also really nice. So if you want to contact me separately, I'm happy to send that to you.
Arshad, did that cover just about everything that you were looking for?
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you. And thank you for the wonderful presentation also, Adam. Thank you very much.
Oh, my pleasure. I know it's a lot of material, but I haven't figured out a way to condense it any further.
Hey, Adam, it's John Miller. I just want to compliment you on a very attractive slide deck. It's very effective at getting the message across. Well delivered too. So great job. Keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you.
Also, I found it refreshing, right? A lot of the emphasis lately has been on agile, and I've always felt like we're not always serving people more traditional construction industries. And I felt that what you presented here was extremely relevant and useful for a certain subset of our members. So I was eating it up. I'm going to fill out your form. I'm going to get your slide deck because there's some nuggets in there. I don't remember some of this stuff, maybe some of it's new, but I definitely want to take a closer look. So thank you so much for your time and great job.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right, folks, we're just coming up to the 1 o'clock hour. So I just want to be cognizant of everybody's time. I know this is lunch hour for most of you. Everybody's eating off the side of their desks, I'm sure. So I know, Kendi, you want to say just a couple of parting words before we say goodbye to everybody?
Yes, Adam, thank you so much. Wow, I was just eating everything up. Like, I just live and breathe this world. So just your presentation was so smooth, just really relevant and resonated. So thank you so much for, coming and presenting to our community of Kevin, thank you for everything, organizing this and all the background busyness that it takes to put something like this together. Thank you very much. And to everyone who joined us joined us today, we cannot thank you enough to just participating and being here together, and just, we do this for you, so you attending really is important to us. And yes, please fill out the feedback. We do want to do better, and let us know what you're looking for. So everybody, thank you so much. This was just excellent. Have a great day and stay dry.
Super. Thanks again for tuning in, and I appreciate it. And thanks again. I really, really appreciate all the feedback.
Great.
Adam, thank you again. Thanks for your time, and I'm sure we'll be connecting before you head down south. That's for sure.
Sounds good. All right. Take care, everyone.
Take care, everybody. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.